Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip has to do with how do you phrase, what do you do about a buyer's due diligence period if you are waiting on something from the seller? How do you write that up in an offer? For example, let's say that the seller has to turn the utilities on. What do you do with the buyer's due diligence period? What if you are writing a contract on new construction and you're waiting on a certificate of occupancy? What if you are working with a buyer and the seller has tenants and they are supposed to vacate the property and you are waiting until the property is vacant before the buyer starts, or before the buyer, how do you address that with due diligence? What if it is a short sale? Yikes! You have to wait to hear about short sale approval. How do you address the buyer's what if the property is in a community, an HOA, and you are waiting on the seller to complete the community association disclosure, so forth and so on. The issue is, how do you write that up? How do you approach a buyer's due diligence in a situation where you have to wait for the seller to do something? The reason it's a question is you want to be able to have your buyer potentially not spend money on inspections and surveys and well tests or septic tests or termite letters, or you don't necessarily want your buyer to spend money on a property if something is not going to happen, if something is not going to go about. On the other hand, you don't want your due diligence time frame to run out before your buyer has a chance to have it inspected or surveyed or check out flood insurance or the zoning or anything like that. So what do you do? How do you address this? Well, your inclination is to say buyer's due diligence to begin when the seller does this, this, and this. Let's just take the example of utilities. Let's say you're showing a property, utilities are not on, and you need the utilities on for the buyer to do their inspections, and they're going to have to be on for an appraiser and so forth and so on. So your first gut instinct is buyer's due diligence to begin when buyer receives written notice from seller that all utilities are on and operational. So that means your buyer doesn't have to spend money on anything until they don't have to go hire an inspector until they know the utilities are on, because the inspector is not going to be able to do anything. Well, what happens if you have, let's just say, for example, you have a 10-day due diligence period. You're waiting, you never hear from anyone. You don't know what is going on. Your buyer's like, you know what? I don't think this seller is, something's going on. I just want to terminate. Let's go find another house. How can you terminate? What are you going to terminate on? You can't terminate on due diligence because you're binding with a stipulation that says due diligence has not begun until something happens. So if that something never happens, your buyer never gets their termination rights to protect their earnest money because you haven't started due diligence. If you don't address the issue at all and you just put in a due diligence period, let's say 10 days due diligence and the utilities are not on, and you don't address it, well, you don't hear from the seller, you don't hear from the seller, you don't hear from the seller. You're on day 8 or 9 of your due diligence, and your buyer, they want the house, but they're going to have to terminate because they can't have it inspected. So what do you do? Things that make you go, How do you address a buyer's due diligence in this situation where you have to wait on the seller to do something? Here's what you do. You write a special stipulation that says due diligence to begin upon binding agreement date, just like it normally does, and to extend for X number of days, 10 days, 3 days, 4 days, whatever. Let's just say 10 days. Buyer's due diligence to begin upon binding agreement date and to extend for 10 days after buyer's receipt of written confirmation from seller that whatever it is. In my example, that all utilities are on and operational. Until due diligence to begin upon binding agreement date and extend for 10 days after buyer's receipt of completed community association disclosure exhibit. Whatever it is that you're waiting on from the seller. The reason you want to do it that way is your buyer does not have to spend money on inspection, so forth and so on, until the seller performs. So you still have those 10 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever you negotiate, after you get written confirmation from the seller of whatever this issue is. But if you never hear from the seller, you never get that certificate of occupancy from new construction. You never get confirmation that all the utilities are on or and operational. You never get information, you never get a completed homeowners association disclosure exhibit. Community association disclosure. Your buyer can go ahead and terminate and get their earnest money back because you're already in due diligence. So the other thought is, okay, let's say if you don't address it with a special stipulation, let's say you wrote a special stipulation that says, buyer's due diligence to begin upon receipt from seller of notice that all utilities are on and operational. Well, you don't want to send the notice to extend due diligence. That still does not do you any good. You're still not in the due diligence or the buyer's right to terminate time frame because it has not yet begun. So again, I'll write it out below. The special stipulation is due diligence period to begin upon binding agreement date and to extend for X number of days after buyer's receipt of written confirmation of fill in the blank. Hope this contract tip helped you out. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.